Welcome back to this episode, part 2 of painting a woodland chickadee. In part 1, I demonstrated how I drew my image from my tablet to my pastel paper and nearly completed the chestnut-backed chickadee. In this episode, part 2, I will demonstrate how to paint the background trees around the chickadee and then add the final details to complete the chickadee and surrounding background. Before I can complete the chickadee details, I need to finish the areas in the background where the chickadee may overlap. I'm going to start with a dark green, hunter green, to create some pine needles in the distant background. I will use my darkest shades of green first and then gradually add lighter shades over my pine branches. I want to mostly complete these pine needles before I begin working on the small branches that overlap the needles. These background needles need to be a little bit blurry, so I will gently begin to rub the pastel to create a more blurry effect. Then I can darken the pine stem and add a few sharp details with a lighter shade of pine needles. Once I have a nice blend of pine needles, I will start working on these very small branches by applying a shade of brown just to block in these areas. Once I apply the first layer of color to the branches, I will use my paper blending stump to smooth and blend the color into the paper. The Uart sanded paper holds many layers of color, and this base layer creates my foundation for more colors to put over it. And I will begin to contour the branches by using a very dark shade of brown to gradually blend and create a curvature to the branches. I'm going to continue to build the base foundation of the limbs and branches and gradually add some shading and some small details, which include some pine cones and more pine needles throughout this painting. Now that I have a good base on some of these branches and limbs, I'm going to start adding some of the green moss and some of the white crusty patches that are growing on the branch. I don't think it's harmful to the trees, and I think it only brings out some of the beauty in nature. So I'm just about done completing some of these little pine cones, and I'm going to begin adding more shading and details to this large limb. I'm going to block in where some of this lichen is growing on the tree, and then begin adding some green to the area where the moss is growing. I will apply lighter shades of green over this area and to create these stringy little strands of green moss. I'm going to shade these little crusty patches of white growing on the limb, and I'll use my black or dark brown to shade beneath these patches to create some shadows and depth to these formations. Now that I have the rest of the limbs blocked in with my brown pastel, I am going to stop here and actually turn my painting upside down to complete the top section of the painting. Sometimes it's just easier to turn an image around to complete an area. There is a group of pine needles at the top corner of this image, and I find it easier to draw these shapes and needles in this position. I used a very dark green to create the background for these pine needles, and I will gradually work from dark to light using my greens to create these needles. Once I've added enough needles, I will blend it a little bit to give it a slight blurry appearance. Then I'll add a few very light pine needles to finish this area. I'm going to work on another limb that also has some interesting bark texture and some of the growth growing on top of the limb. And I will begin by applying the darkest areas first. And I'm also adding a little purple to the color and then blending again to create a smooth yet textured surface. Now that I've finished this area of the limb, I will turn my painting around again and begin adding the final shading and details to the painting. So please follow along for a few moments as I finalize some of the shading in the branches and limbs of the tree. Now that the tree branches are mostly done, I can finish the chickadee's legs and feet. I am using a light gray for some highlights in his toes and also using a little bit of a turquoise green to create some nice highlights in his toes. The painting is nearly done and I will go through the painting and add the final details and shading that I feel could be improved. Next, I will zoom up a little bit so that I can apply the final little details to the chickadee's feathers. I am using some light shades of brown and even yellow to create some of the very soft textures of the downy feathers on the surface. I hope you have enjoyed this demonstration on painting a woodland chickadee. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. And don't forget to press the bell icon to receive notifications of all my new lessons and demonstrations. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next time.